Manufacturing Hub. If you are new here, welcome. If you are been here before, everyone, welcome back. We like to spend, well, I like to chat with everyone for the first couple of minutes, just a couple of community comments as we let everyone get in for the live show. If this is the first time you're here, we love to kind of have open conversations, not only with Sean, our guest, as you guys will see in a matter of just a couple of moments, but we do our very best to have kind of candid conversations with the folks on chat. And if you guys have questions for Sean or any of the topics that we are bringing up, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in chat. We will do our best to either answer them while we're live and bring them into conversations with Sean, or if not that, we will do our very best to make sure they get answered after the show. And then kind of my only other major comment here is we want to say hi to everyone on Solus PLC's YouTube. Sean, I don't know if you know, Vlad runs Solus PLC's YouTube, posts a lot of great videos, and we go and we stream to them every week. I have found that Vlad doesn't ask people on Solus PLC to subscribe to his own YouTube channel, so this is me asking people to subscribe to Solus PLC's YouTube, hit the like button, and do those same things on the LinkedIn Live if you guys are watching
Thank
live.
you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so without further ado, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. We are talking future of automation and manufacturing all this month long. And today we have Sean Dotson coming on the show. Sean, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks, Vlad. Really appreciate it. I've been watching you guys for quite some time now, and it's an honor to be invited on board.
Appreciate that, Sean. Before we dive into what the automation industry looks like in 2023, could you give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineer from the University of Florida, Go Gators, even though we really stank this year in college football. Got out of school, studied robotics, mechanical engineering, got out of school and went to work for a packaging company for a short period of time, and then found a home at a custom automation company down here in Florida. It was called iAutomation. Kind of went up through the ranks as a project engineer, and then eventually was running engineering and manufacturing. Throughout the years, we were bought by larger and larger corporations, and we were finally owned by a multi-billion-dollar European corporation who had too many facilities all over the world, and decided in 2004 that our facility drew a short straw, and they decided to move our products all over the world. And what was left was this robotics group that I had kind of come up through the ranks through. So I basically told them, hey, why don't you sell it to myself and two of my top engineers? So the three of us started R&D on January 1st, 2005. And as we went from the largest custom automation company in the Southeast to the smallest pretty quickly. Throughout, from 2005 through 2010 grew fairly steadily. After the recession in 2008, there was a contraction in the industry, and we were one of the lucky ones to be able to get through it, and then just grew exponentially after 2010 when the economy took back off. Mm-hmm. Acquired a machine shop, acquired a packaging company to add to what we were doing as a lot of medical device assembly and testing and validation. We started doing medical device packaging as well. And then in late 2020, I sold the company to a private equity firm out of New York. Stayed on as president of R&D and CTO of two of the other sister companies that they also held that were an industrial distributor and a panel build shop out of Wisconsin. And then in October of last year, I decided that it was time to move on and do some, bigger and different and better things. So taking some time off now and kind of exploring my options and figuring out what my next step wants to be. I think I'm spending more time networking and talking on the phone now than I was ever before, but it's been fun. I was telling Vlad before the podcast, it's a blessing and a curse to kind of be able to reinvent yourself at some point in your career, because there's so many options of what I could possibly do or want to do. It's tough to narrow them down a little bit. So that's a little bit of history of myself.
Sean, I have many questions. I think, we can take this conversation in many directions, and I want to dig into, how you grew the business and what that was like. And I'm sure that we'll give a lot of tips to the listeners on that side, but maybe earlier in the career, I'm curious, on the mechanical background side, because I get this question, I want to say often for engineers looking to get into robotics or integration. And I know that both disciplines are equally as valuable. I guess my question is, what are your thoughts about going into, let's say, electrical versus mechanical? Did you have to maybe learn, or did you have a learning curve that was different than what you would expect on the electrical side? And what would you recommend ultimately for someone looking into integration and robotics in 23 to pursue as a degree, perhaps, or as an education?
Mhm. Um, well, I'm going to be a little bit biased because I'm a mechanical engineer.
Mhm.
I was the kid that always took apart the alarm clock and the old TV, and my dad would come home horrified that I was taking apart a TV with a big capacitor on the back of it, and could have electrocuted myself and didn't know better. But I was an auto mechanic in college. I've just always been more mechanically inclined. Funny enough, my dad was an electrical engineer, so I picked up a little bit of the electrical side from
Interesting.
him. I had to take circuits class like anybody else, just one circuits class. But I've been dangerous enough with electronics, but there's never been that electrical guy. Now, some people will put programming under the electrical side. I've always kind of considered it to be almost a third class of, you've got mechanical, electrical, and then controls, programming.
Mhm.
What I have found is interesting is that I would say out of all the programmers I've met, I would say a majority, over 60%, 70% even, have been mechanical engineers by
Really?
education. And I
Okay.
find that, and honestly, some of the best that I've met have been mechanical engineers. And I think part of that is maybe they understand what they need to program. Like, what is the mechanics? How does it need to move? How does it need to operate? Not taking anything away from any programmers who are electrical engineers. There's some amazing ones out there, but it's been interesting. And I've talked to a few other people, and they've had similar experiences with mechanical. Um, I think it's interesting is that some colleges now are starting to offer more blended degrees. So it's electromechanical degrees, or automation, industrial automation sciences degrees, things like that, where both 2-year and 4-year degrees, where you get a mixture of both. And that I think would be very powerful. Somebody who's just looking to get into the industry, who hasn't even gone to school yet, or maybe going back to school, that I think could be a very powerful degree, because as we all know, especially at small automation companies, you got to be a jack of all trades. I've done lots of robot programming over my life, even though I'm a mechanical engineer, because I had to. I've even done a little bit of electrical design, when I'm not very proud of, but it did catch on fire. So I think I succeeded at this point, right?
No,
So
it's an interesting perspective. I certainly
yeah,
appreciate it. Like I said, I think engineers, how to say, like, ask that question a lot, right? And for me, it's more like I wish I knew more mechanical aspects so that I could be a better, I guess, like, programmer. And then for them, it's like, well, I wish I knew more programming so I could be a better, like,
sure,
automation engineer. But I think there's
yeah,
certainly a balance to some extent. But it's an interesting conversation point.
yeah.
If I
And
if I can,
there's no reason you can't be learning other skills too. Like
of course.
very early on, I took PLC programming classes just because I wanted to understand what the programmer was doing to my mechanical designs. I wanted to know how it worked. I knew I was never really going to be a PLC programmer, but
Mhm.
it's helpful to be able to understand their constraints and what they can and can't do. So while you're designing the entire system, you're not making it more difficult to program maybe than it needs to
Right. Sean, if I can ask you, maybe in the early years of when you were just starting your company with a few colleagues, you mentioned, I believe you were three together, right?
be.
What
Yep.
was the experience like? What were you? I mean, what were you concerned with, and ultimately, maybe what would you do differently if you were starting or recommending somebody to start a similar venture today?
Well, I mean, when we got started, we were concerned about putting food on the table.
Mhm.
We I don't think we took a salary for 6 months or so, maybe even a little bit longer, just to, to build up the company. So we all lived off our savings and, scraped up some money and just as low cost as possible. We contracted out the things that we couldn't do ourselves. So we kept our overhead pretty low. We were always, conservative. We wouldn't grow for the sake of growth, wouldn't spend money on things that we really didn't need to. But if it made economic sense, we went out and bought a CNC fairly early on because we found that even though there were machine shops around us, there's just times that we needed to bust out a part immediately. We could not wait for the machine shop 2-3 days to get that part. So I think being conservative was good. It probably also, and I'll say not in the very, very beginning, but within the first 5 years or so, we were probably a little too conservative on the sales side. And this is something that I learned and probably would definitely, if I had to go back and do it over again, I would be a little bit more aggressive on the sales side. Not only, I guess, expanding our sales presence. So, I did pretty much all the sales, and then I brought on a salesperson and they were helping out. And throughout the years, we had various salespeople and for different periods of time. But I never really wanted to. I was like, I don't want to go manage a sales guy out in California, or a salesperson in the Midwest when we were a kind of Southeastern, company. But looking back on that, we could have gotten so much more work if I just had been a little bit more aggressive with that. And it took probably until, I don't know, probably the middle of owning R&D, 8-9 years in, to realize that, hey, we could be doing a lot more if we really got a lot more aggressive. So that's probably what I'd say is my advice to people getting started is don't skimp on sales, because that's the lifeblood of a company. That's what's bringing the work in. You can be the best engineer in the world if you don't have projects to work on, though. Then what are you doing?
Is there something that you would recommend, I guess, someone who's trying to scale and is unsure if they're ready to hire somebody on sales or maybe outsource part of a sales team? What do they need to look for to know that, hey, maybe this is the right time for us to try and scale that? Because, and I guess I'm drawing from my conversations, at least, a lot of people are excellent executioners of technical projects, right? Like whatever that may be, that could be PLC projects, HMI, SCADA, all the way to MES or ERP systems. But I think a lot of those individuals also struggle with scaling and hiring that sales force, right? Like you mentioned. So what would you look for someone who's in that position?
So, I think if you're finding yourself, as a leader of a company or owner of a company, spending more of your time doing the work than actually going out and finding the work. So you're working in the company more than you're working on the company. That's a time where you probably need to start looking at hiring out some sales or finding some other avenue to generate those. Because if you're not constantly filling that pipeline, the work that you've got right now for the next 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it is, what happens after that period of time's over? So it's a full-time job. And so many people, including myself, made the mistake of, oh my gosh, we've got so much work, we're fat and happy, we're working all this work, and then you neglect the pipeline. And then all of a sudden this project's starting to kind of ramp down and end, and you're like, oh, where's the next one? Now you're scrambling to go out and find, more work. And as we all know, these projects, the gestation period can be sometimes a year or more on some of these projects. Okay, I got 3 months of runway left in this project and I've got a year wait for the next project. Well, you're in trouble at that point. So, definitely get ahead of that curve. I think a lot of people are afraid to go spend the money on a salesperson. Yes, they're expensive. In fact, they probably should be the highest paid person at your company, based on commissions and all, because without them, you have nothing coming in. Right. Now, that being said, the owner of the company probably is always going to be the best salesperson for the company. When you're the president, when you're the owner, the CEO, you've got the most credence, you've got the most presence, in front of the customer. But you can't be everywhere, and you've got to be working on other aspects of the company. So don't be afraid to go out and take a flyer on somebody who that you respect and that you think will help your company. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of really great salespeople out there.
No, I certainly appreciate it. Like I said, I think a lot of us, including our listeners, are interested in again how to scale their company. And sales, I think, is an important part of that, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, what are your thoughts? Maybe you have a question for Sean as well.
I do. So I guess I've got lots of questions for Sean. Would love to get some of his perspective looking forward. But before we do that, I want to ask kind of one last follow-up question on the if you were starting over, you would be more aggressive. Kind of comment, Sean. How, I guess in your opinion, how can a group be aggressive, right? How can they go out and get in front of people and try to have all of these conversations? What's the balance between that and coming off as being the group that is just too pushy, right? Like I feel like that's always the fine line, right? Like, hey, I want to go pitch the product, but at some point, I need to say, if I continue to pitch and push hard, they may never want to talk to me again. So, what are your thoughts on what that line looks like?
Yeah, it is a fine line. I have always been one that I will go after a customer and try to present to them to give them reasons why they should be using us, and it usually has nothing to do with the technical solution. Okay. It's got to do more with, you have a problem, let's identify the problem, which sometimes customers don't know what their problem is. They think they need automation. They think the problem is here, but in reality, it's actually upstream 5 steps. And if you solve that problem, then the one downstream really doesn't matter. Sometimes they think they have a quality issue and really it's a labor issue, or vice versa. So, part of it is figuring out what their problem is, then showing them how you can provide a solution. Because I never believed on selling on features and benefits and technology. That's important. I mean, you've got to show them that you are innovative. You've got to show them that you are competent, technically competent, things like that. But let's be honest. There's 100 companies out there that can program a robot, install it for you, right? But installing the right robot, building it the correct way, putting it in the correct position and making the program as easy to use and all, those are all value adds that you need to sell on. And I think if you do that, people don't find you as pushy necessarily. They find you as wanting to provide a solution. I've also always approached customers, if I'm trying to talk to a customer and I'm just not getting anywhere, I'll back off. It's kind of, I joke with some of my sales guys. It's like asking the girl to prom. If you ask her 3 times, after the 3rd time, you just kind of look kind of desperate at that point, right? And maybe it's not the right fit. Yep. Maybe it's not the right time. Maybe she's not into you. Maybe there's lots of other things. But maybe it's time to move on. And maybe there's another customer who is looking for your services and ready. So always leave the door open though, for them to come back. Later on, it may not be the right time. A year from now, they'll be, hey, Sean, we're ready now. We weren't ready before. We're ready to do some automation. So that's my advice. Don't be too pushy. But at the same time, it doesn't always hurt too once a year to kind of go, hey guys, remember me? Just checking in. Want to see if you're ready for some solutions at this point.
Absolutely no. I think that that all of that is very good advice. Thank you for that, Sean. Kind of looking towards the future, right? So you had alluded to it earlier, the landscape between the last couple of years and what we're seeing coming up in 2023, especially in the automation space, be it automating things on factory floors or being automation groups is probably going to be a little bit different for 2023 and maybe beyond that. Can you tell us some of your thoughts as to what that landscape is going to look like?
Sure. And again, these are my opinions, just based on my experience, and don't place any bets on them. the last couple of years have been wildly different than anything in the automation industry. I've seen ups, I've seen downs, but I don't think anybody's seen what we've seen the last couple of years. And there's a lot of different factors. Obviously, COVID was one of them. Just a disruption in everything, a supply chain disruption in how we work and the number of people working and all. But there's also, I think, COVID also showed that there was an underlying demographic problem too in the United States of the aging workforce and the baby boomers retiring. Maybe retiring a little bit early, so it wasn't because of COVID, but it was exacerbated by COVID, perhaps. So the last couple of years have been amazing for everybody. Any automation company worth their salt has had record years the last couple of years. With a cooling off of the economy, with interest rates going up, with threats of recession, with inflation, manufacturing companies tend to be conservative. They are starting to retract a little bit. They had their heyday as well. All the retail companies, the manufacturers, they couldn't produce enough goods. They're starting to see things soften a bit, I think, as well. And I think that 2023 is still going to be it's going to be certainly a net positive growth. It's still going to be a growth. And I think automation, for the next foreseeable 10, 15, maybe even 20 years is going to see a net growth. But we're not going to be seeing what we saw over the last couple of years. So I'm afraid that there are going to be some automation companies that, scaled up maybe a little bit too much, a little too rapidly. And they may be looking at having to tighten their belt a little bit. I would say that my advice would be right now, be conservative. Go out and find those customers that are your good customers and try to figure out a plan, a roadmap for continuing to automate with them for the next couple of years. There'll always be new customers, but there are also going to be a lot of customers that we're thinking about automation, and now they're kind of pausing a little bit. Backing up and saying, well, we're going to see how things pan out. I'm not sure how this is going to pan out, but there's been a lot of talk of layoff, well, not talk, but actual layoffs. A lot of the tech industry is getting a lot of news, but even within the retail industry, Amazon, McDonald's announced 200,000 the other day. There's some other DoorDash. So there's a lot of those, kind of entry to mid-level positions that are going to be, people are going to be, out of work. Manufacturers who have, for the last couple of years, been crying that they cannot find any labor, which is true, may find themselves in a position where now they have quite a bit of labor. So I'm wondering, how many of them will then say, well, now we don't need to automate because we've got labor. In my opinion, a little short-sighted. It's going to come back to bite them in the end, but you can't control what those manufacturers are doing. So definitely going to see some softening, I think, in 2023. And companies just need to be, prudent and conservative in the way they're moving forward. The strong ones will be fine, but I think there probably will be some, casualties as well too.
I'm curious, Sean, if I can follow up on that answer, the thought of labor shortages, right? And I think automation has traditionally been sold as, well, we can automate a process for which you don't have enough people that you can hire for, right? And so I think to a certain degree that is correct in the current landscape, but we're also very short-staffed on the engineering and maintenance teams. And so I'm wondering, where is that fine balance, right? Because last year, as you said, we had almost record sales, and in certain industries we had record sales, and now we just cannot find the right people to run, maintain, and integrate that equipment. Do you think there's going to be maybe this, I want to say an oscillation effect, right? But an over-damped system that will ultimately somehow self-correct itself? And I don't know what the answer is, right? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on over-automating, and now you cannot find maybe the professionals that will kind of run that equipment.
Yeah, we saw that even within the last couple of years. So because of the automation boom that happened, so many people were automating, and a lot of companies that had automated for the first time. We as much as we strive to build equipment, I think everybody does, to build equipment that doesn't break down or doesn't have problems or doesn't need debugging and all. We always told our customers that you have to take ownership of this machine. This is not, a rented piece of equipment that if it breaks, you're going to call us every 5 minutes. You have to have that technical ability to do at least, low level debugging of, okay, machine stopped. Why? Let's look at the HMI. Oh, it says this sensor didn't make. Well, why? You looked at the machine. Oh, a part fell and jammed in behind the actuator. That's the type of things that we expect the customers to be able to do. It's funny, I sat down though with a group of manufacturers and I told them that story and they said, well, that's great and all, but you need to assume that we have no clue what we're doing and that we won't be able to fix the machine. So you need to build your equipment even easier to use than you already are. So I took that to heart, and a few years ago, I told my controls engineers, I said, look, we've got these great machines and, everything works well, but, our HMIs still look like they're from, 1990. It's like, we need to make these machines easier to use. So we spent a lot of time in an internal project, completely revamping all of our HMIs and I showed everybody, I said, this does not, there we go. This does not have a user manual, right? Whether it's an iPhone or an Android. A user manual does not exist for this, but you can hand it to a toddler and they can figure out how to use it, right? So I want our HMIs to be that easy to use. Same slider switches, graphical icons that don't need to be translated into foreign languages, start, stop, pause, that sort of thing, all those standard icons, and show the user how to debug the machine, step them through step by step. Have you done this? Okay. Have you cleared that? Yes. Okay, good. Everything is green. It's ready to go. All right, start. And the machine starts. So, we were trying to help get away from the need to have some of those high level, technicians. You still need them. I mean, if something mechanically breaks, you got to fix it, right? You need somebody who knows what they're doing. But we don't expect everybody to be experts in the piece of equipment. So, I mean, just to kind of a little bit long-winded answer, but that will continue to be a problem. The skills gap of everybody always talks about the machinists. We don't have any young machinists anymore. We don't really have a whole lot of young technicians from an electrical and mechanical standpoint either. Which again, we could beat the same drum that everybody's been beating for the longest time of tech schools versus engineering schools, and I think we've all heard that argument. We all support it. But we should continue to repeat the message because we do need to get more young people into those type of roles, and it's a great industry to be in, and it's got a long runway.
No, I would absolutely agree. I think it's also important to consider, again, like due to the COVID impact, a lot of the, I want to say, traditional software companies have transitioned to complete remote, right? And it's also a difficult, how to say it, like perk to compete with, because in manufacturing, I think we need solid programmers, and at the end of the day, you need to be there to do the actual work, right? And so I think it's gonna have to come down to clever or better ways to incentivize people to go into manufacturing versus considering employment in some of those traditional software companies. But I don't have the answer. I'm always curious about that, but it's going to be interesting to see.
I think you mentioned the remote, and yes, absolutely. You've got to, at some point you've got to be there to download the program into the machine and get it going. Or if you're doing integration, you got to be on site, of course. We embraced the remote aspect of COVID, and really even after we started bringing everybody back, we allowed people to work remotely, both mechanical and controls and electrical, by putting in IT systems that allowed them to easily do this. So when a PLC guy really needs to hammer out some code, they want to put on their headphones. They don't want to be bothered. They don't want somebody coming up to their desk. And also, program from home. Go home, spend 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it is, hammer out the code, and then you come into the office of the factory and download it and start doing your debug. And we just found that it really worked really, really well. So I've been a big fan of that remote work. I know this wasn't your question, but it kind of spurred a thought. Is that I saw the other day and the news popped up. Lots of companies now are saying like, nope, mandatory 3-4 days back at the office. Disney just announced 4 days at the office, and I really think that's doing a disservice because we've we've learned, we collectively as a country have learned how to do things, remotely. I mean, this conversation, even 4 or 5 years ago, would have had to have taken place at a a bar after a conference or a trade show or something like that. And now through the magic of Zoom calls and LinkedIn and all that, we're able to share all this information, we're all over the country, right now, instantaneously. So companies, I think, need to embrace that, and progressive companies are starting to understand that, but there's still a lot of old school companies in our industry that, like, nope, you've got to be in the office 40 hours a week, no excuses. And I just, I don't agree necessarily with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think,
go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's a good point, Sean. Every time I see one of these kind of large organizations demand a return to office, it is just, I kind of look at the organization and I think that the people making the decisions are doing it for their comfort level, right? Maybe they're not comfortable having Teams calls or Zoom calls. Maybe they're not comfortable being able to go knock on the door of the person that they want to talk to, or more realistically, just open the door and destroy whatever they had planned to do for that day. And because the lack of comfort of the decision makers, and their desire to kind of command their domain, if you will, they have decided everyone has to return to work. And honestly, I think a lot of top companies are going to lose a lot of their top engineers and their top minds, because we've proven that many of us can work successfully from home. And sometimes many of us can work successfully from home in a fraction of the time that it took to attempt to go do it during the work week, during the work week in the office. So I think that, yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's a lot of it is that comfort level. It's maybe leaders, and there's nothing, I can't necessarily fault them for their previous beliefs. They've always come to work. That was they were in the office all the time. They don't know how to not do that. Even if they do embrace the tools, it just becomes this mindset of just, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, 30 plus years. I don't know anything how to do it differently. So they do have to break out of their comfort zone and allow maybe the younger generation to teach them a different way of how to do it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, when COVID first hit, we sent everybody home. I and a couple of managers went into the office every day, though, just because we were just used to it and we felt like we needed to be there. And then very quickly we were like, why are we here? We can get this much work done from home. So, it took us even us, middle of the career guys, it took us a while to figure that out.
Absolutely. And it will be interesting to see where we go, where we go with that as an industry, and perhaps broader than just our particular industry. I do want to ask a question, kind of bringing back talking about kind of the need of skills at the manufacturing facility, right? So you guys would go deliver we'll just call it a work cell, right? You deliver a work cell, and there would be some level of kind of assumption of they would be able to, the manufacturing facility on site would be able to go troubleshoot and figure this out. And they had some level of assumption of, Sean, you're going to make this so error proof that it's never going to break. And if it breaks, maybe you can sell us a robot to go fix it. Right.
Yeah.
I guess I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot, and I'm not sure that we have really good conversations when it comes to whose responsibility is it. Should the systems integrators go sell service and support contracts to make sure that it always stays up and running? Should there be better training? And if there's better training and buildup of the technical skills on the manufacturing side, whose responsibility is that? Are you having those sort of conversations? And if you are, what do those sort of conversations look like?
Yeah, we definitely are. It was a lesson learned, when you first start out, you build the equipment, you put it down in place, and then they're calling you every 5 minutes, and you're like, you guys should know this stuff. This is so simple. But you realize, like, they have no training, they have no experience. They're not as experienced as we are. And then so over time, you start talking to customers. As I mentioned before, it's like you explain in the beginning, you need to take ownership of this, right? Now, what I would do to help the customer, we always had our factory acceptance test where they would come in to run off the equipment. we would invite them to bring as many people as they want. And in fact, bring operators, bring the operator who's actually going to be running this machine. They will then, be able to get used to the piece of equipment. They're not just seeing it for the first time when it hits the factory floor. Yeah. They're seeing it in its environment where it's still, they still have a chance maybe to make a few little minor changes here and there at the end. Nothing major, of course, right? Hopefully that's already been taken care of design reviews. But it's amazing that sometimes an operator would go like, well, hey, instead of the button being on the second screen that I have to flip over to, like, could you move it to the first screen? Like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Sure, yeah, easy. Programmer pops it over, right? So we'll also get them to, send product, a real product, and run it in the environment and in the way that you're going to be doing it. Don't send us your perfect samples. Send us that dinged up box that you're going to be using, in your factory floor. So let's figure out how the products are really running. We would do training on our floor, and to show them how to use the machine. And then when we do the site acceptance test, the SAT, we would then reinforce that training. The good thing is a lot of times you'd show up and the operator's like, oh, they knew the engineers, they knew the project manager from when they were at our facility. So it's a little bit of a reunion. You get back together again. We always tell them, you got to name all the robots, got to give them a name. So when we'd show up, we'd ask what the names of the robots were, and got some creative ones over the years. But at that point, then you have a really good idea of how much did they absorb, while they were at the factory acceptance test. You kind of give them a reinforcement of training at that site acceptance test, and then beyond that, always offered additional training, right? And we offered support contracts as well. Some people would take them because they knew that they didn't have the skill set necessarily to support it all the way, and some people wouldn't. We try to be fair. If you call up and you get a question of your stuff, we're going to work through it. We're not going to charge you for it and all. But again, it's one of those, if you're calling every week kind of with the same silly question or like, hey, we went over this a few times, that's when you have to kind of sit down with the customer and have a hard conversation that, you either need to ramp up your training or you need to pay for a support contract.
I think that definitely makes sense, right? And I would maybe add to that thought. A lot of it is also confidence, right? So a lot of times they don't feel like they have the skill set to maybe work on that equipment, and so
right.
The engineering teams or the operators, technicians, whatever it may be, how to say, they're scared to touch a new piece of machinery that's just been put on the production floor, and so if they know they have access to that phone call and you're going to show up in the next 5 minutes, they also kind of steer in that direction. But no, it's I think it's going to be interesting to see if again, like if integrators with I want to say like less of a workforce on their side will be putting better systems in place to kind of like address and support that need. Again, I don't have an answer, but I think they'll have to adapt better. And as you said, there's now like remote in technologies that are better. I think they're more cyber secure. There's a little bit less of, just dropping in your VPN on the guest network, that sort of thing. So we're better equipped, I want to say.
Yes, definitely. And I was just gonna mention the remote in technologies, and I always say dial in, which kind of dates us a little bit, but it's kind of like roll down your window. It's one of those terms that's never going to go away. But yeah, the remote in technologies, super important, and we got to the point where pretty much every machine. We started off like, oh, if the machine goes out of state, we'll put one in, but if it's in state, we won't put one. And then we got to the point like, no, if we can even save a 3-hour drive, within the same state, it's worth putting that in. Interesting that you mentioned the cybersecurity though. It's still a struggle with IT, large IT organizations at large customers. As soon as you start mentioning anything about remote, they're like, nope, because that's the easy answer, right? Is no. And I've had discussions with some of those IT groups like, look, this is military grade encryption with double key, and I said this is more secure than your Windows network is, but you won't let it on your network. So I think we have to educate the IT groups as to what these products are. In fact, we even did a little white paper to give to those IT groups explaining the advantages and how secure it really was, because it was just an uphill battle for the longest time with these IT groups.
I've been part of some of those conversations, so I feel the pain.
I'm sure you have.
but speaking of different technologies, Sean, I'm curious also, your outlook on maybe various, how to say it, technologies that we see in our space. I think for the longest time, we've been super excited about AI. We've seen a new chat messaging, whatever app that came out. Like, what are your thoughts on maybe the landscape of various tech in manufacturing? So, like AI, maybe machine vision, robotics, traditional
Mm.
integration. Like, what are your thoughts on how they're going to be like more funded, gain more interest, less interest? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad you picked a nice small subject to talk about here. So there's a lot of facets of that. So I'll try to pick some of them off. The AI. I mean, I'll be honest with you. For the longest time, everybody was using AI, as a buzzword. And my joke to other people is, AI is not just a bunch of if-then statements, which I think some people believe that it is. The Chat GPT, it's really interesting. It's got a lot of momentum. There's a lot of excitement for it. I'm not sure it's as polished and ready to go as some other people do. We got a lot of work to do. I, like everybody else, being a programmer, I fed it some saying, "Hey, write me a program that does this." And what I found is it does a decent job at giving you kind of base logic, but don't trust it to get syntax right, because it flat out has gotten syntax completely wrong. And I said, write this program in multiple languages, and it didn't get any of them correct. But if you get stuck and you don't know how, you get like kind of writer's block or coder's block, it's an interesting tool to say, hey, how do I do this? It may give you a pseudocode that you can then adapt. So that it's useful in that way. Absolutely. I think image processing, from like the Dolly side, the automatic art generation. My son's going to school for graphic design, and that is just every class he's taking is talking about how to use it and how to almost combat it and prevent it from taking away from the graphic designers. It's a big deal, because that to me is even more amazing than the chat side of things. So if you take some of that vision, though, there's some companies out there. Cognex years ago bought a company called Vidi that was doing artificial intelligence and deep learning and all. I think that's going to continue. I think there's going to be a lot of advances in vision. Hopefully, price of vision is going to start coming down. Ease of use of vision. If you can just teach it, good, bad, and then let it go. That's going to be so much better than working in spreadsheets or even a GUI interface, right? So I think AI is definitely going to continue in that vision side. Robotics, I don't know. Do we really want? Robots are dangerous things, and I already, as anybody who knows me on LinkedIn, will tell you, I already see so many cells that are just inherently dangerous and haven't done a risk assessment. If we start letting artificial intelligence, move the robots and all, are we? If we aren't building in some of that safety, are we opening ourselves up to more potential? And I'm not worried about them turning into Terminator and killing people. It's just is it going to move when we didn't explicitly tell it to move? Right? Is it going to make an assumption that well, the gate way over there is open, but I'm over here, so I'll go ahead and move into the gate over there. No, it's don't move if the gate is open. So we've got to be careful in that. So that's kind of from that the AI side of things. I think how some of these technologies might progress.
That's
I know you had a couple other topics. Yeah,
I was gonna comment on the robotics point, and I remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago reading an article, and again, I guess my concern is also on the PR side, right? So there was an incident that happened. I forgot which. It was an automotive plant where someone was injured by a robot, and obviously, as I want to say, journalists do, it was taken out of context, and the title. And I remember this, right, because at the time it was rolling out some palletizing cells. And it said something along the lines of the AI is taking over robots at this factory, and it is it is injuring people and workers, and it's no longer safe. And I think it's
right.
almost one of those. It's not necessarily a prisoner's dilemma, but it's if one company does something with AI and it doesn't go well for that instance, right? Just because maybe it was rushed, right? Maybe it was not even intentional. And that creates a very bad public image of what AI is in manufacturing, and then prevents anyone that has a really good intention and also really good technology to doing anything. I'm really curious. Again, I'm very curious to see how it plays out. I think
Mhm.
in many instances you want to be the first mover, but like I said, it's also making sure that it's ready for the environment. And I completely agree with you to the point that AI is a very advanced field. I think people sometimes joke about it being like an if else statement, but I think if you talk to the real people who are doing AI, it is
Mhm.
incredible, right? And again,
Oh yeah,
uh,
yeah.
there's maybe some dubious applications or mentions of AI in some companies in manufacturing, but I think you should not have any illusion around it being coming in with a lot of
Oh,
potential.
oh, absolutely. I mean, we already have examples of it being in,
Yes.
and you know, and I totally agree. Yes, there's some amazing things being done with it. Kind of going back to what we talked about with the PR is though I was just seeing a lot of people saying we use AI enabled robots and the robot literally is picking apart from here to here, right? I'm like, what's AI about that? There's no AI in that. It's just a buzzword at that point, right?
Mhm.
So you got to be careful with how you do it. And I do remember that I want to say it was in Poland maybe, but the robot, and I
Mhm.
remember reading a robot attacks a human.
Oh,
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like didn't attack a human. The human bypassed the safety guarding or something like that, right? So yeah,
I had to
we've
explain
got
to my friends it's XYZ coordinates. It literally just goes to where you tell it to go. And if you're going to be in its way,
yeah,
it doesn't even know. Right? But, anyways.
mhm.
no, and it goes to the same place every single time, right? It's we used to say like, oh, you're cutting it kind of close to that guarding. I'm like, doesn't matter. It's not going to hit the guarding because it's going to go to the exact same place every single time, right? Unless you go around and move the guarding or you monkey around with the coordinates. So,
No,
Dave.
I love this. I guess I'm excited as I tell everyone to see what AI brings into our industry. I still think that we are a number of years before we're going to have a chatbot for industrial robots, but I'm excited to see what it brings. I also think that there are lots of very basic issues that we need to solve as an industry before artificial intelligence is going to come save us. But I'm excited for the day that we get there.
mhm.
Before we move on, there are some people we need to thank. So this episode and this theme is sponsored by Profit by Design, which is us. Profit by Design is designed to answer the questions: how can I run more efficiently? How can we become profitable or more profitable? And how can I retain my good employees? It's a 3-day process in which we work with your employees to understand the expensive problems that happen on the floor and then create solutions that are net profitable in the first 12 months. Typical results are 20 to 100x return on investment. We've got a stack of case studies from prior projects in our careers that are net $1 million profit or more. If you're looking to run more profitably and figure out how to retain your employees, check us out at profitbydesign.io, profit the letter X design.io, or drop me a message. Looking forward to talking to everyone about that soon. Jumping back in, Sean, we've seen a lot of investment. Right. So we have seen a lot of investment over especially the last 2 or 3 years in automation or manufacturing based startups. And you kind of alluded to in the beginning, you think some of that investment is gonna go away, right? Perhaps you alluded to yeah, maybe if you got some seed or a series A, you're not sure if we're going to as easily give out series B's and C's and D's
Yeah.
as that. We've also seen a bunch of kind of new and innovative style offerings, machines as a service or robots as a service. What are your thoughts on what the next 12 to 18 months of kind of any and all of those style services are going to look like?
Mhm. Right. So again, some of this just comes from my experience. Some of it comes from listening to the guys out who are the VCs who are giving the money away. I should say giving the money away. That's the wrong thing to say. They are providing liquidity. You know, I do believe, and I think the general consensus is that you might still get some seed rounds, you might get some angel investors on some of this, but unless companies are really showing a path to profitability, those later rounds, those BCD rounds, are going to be a lot harder to get,
Mhm.
especially in an industry that is seeing some slowdown. Again, you could come up with an idea and probably get a couple $1 million a couple years ago. Anybody probably could, really. It's gonna be a lot harder now. And these companies who got it over the last few years are really in a position where they need to show that those paths to growth, those paths to profitability, or they're not going to get those additional rounds. So there was a lot in our industry that came out over the last couple of years. Somebody today, I can't remember who it was, somebody posted on it was like the RIP of companies that died in 2020, the startups that died, the robotic and automation companies that died. And I think there was 5 or 6 of them. Yeah. My thought was there's gonna be more than 5 or 6 probably this year. Which is not always a bad thing, because sometimes the technology, it's a good start. Somebody else might pick it up and can continue it, pick up pieces and kind of, revamp it, come up with a new way of presenting it. So, not all's lost, but there's going to be casualties, again, this year. Absolutely. It's machines as a service, robots as a service. This is one that I've asked people to explain to me the math behind this, and multiple times it's been explained, and I still believe that unless you have a standard offering that you can just pump out, put in place, maybe with slight customization to an end of arm tool or a conveyor or something like something minor that you can tweak, even more of an engineer to order type scenario. Those machine as a service companies, I think, could be profitable, could do well, because you're also going to be able to take it back, right? Yep. Because there will be customers that say, we don't want to do this after anymore. Or we lost the contract. We're focusing, we're changing our product dramatically, and this doesn't work anymore. And one of the machines as a service companies said, well, our hope is they continue to have the machine for 10 years. And I said, well, hope's not a strategy though. You have to plan on worst case them getting rid of it at the end of the contract. Now what do? You can't, if it's a custom machine, you're not going to reuse most of this stuff. Maybe a robot, maybe a PLC, maybe an HMI, but probably 80-90% of it's not going to be reusable. So you need to have a standard product that you can bring back, dust off, polish up, make a few changes to, and then put back out into the environment. So again, I think it's another, just like everything in every industry, there are buzzwords every year. And in the last couple of years, the robots as a service and machines as a service has become a bit of a buzzword. There will be successes, I think, and I don't like naming names, but there will be some successes out there. And there's, quite honestly, within the next couple of years, I think there's going to be a lot less of them out there as well.
Yeah, I'm curious on that side, how it's going to play out, because I think I've seen a lot of those, I want to say more business models presented. I quite honestly, I guess in my opinion, it's more of like an accounting play, and I think it offers an advantage if you're just doing like an R&D or proof of concept project. But as you said, once the equipment is deployed, I'm not sure in what state it comes back to you, if it is coming back a bit prematurely than your expected, timeline for that equipment. So I'm curious to see again, like how it's going to play out. I think it's fairly new, so we'll just have to wait and see.
I think the reason it took off recently was, of course, software as a service has been something that's been around for a while, in the venture capital world. And it's a perfect example. You build it once, you sell it, you get a recurring, income stream. And once you get them hooked on that, using that software, typically companies are just going to keep paying for it. Even if they stop using it, they'll forget that they have subscription. They'll just keep paying for it until the accountant comes in and says, do we use this software anymore? I think the VC community saw robots as a service and machines as a service as the same thing as software as a service. They're like, oh, it's the same model, it's the same concept. Let's go ahead and do that. Software as a service works. Why wouldn't this work? So, I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of new machine and robot as a service companies, because that money won't be as freely flowing to them. The ones who are already out there, hopefully they can figure out a way to be successful, and they'll be successful. But I don't see a lot of new ones coming out.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Sean, if I can ask you maybe to share, if you have some ideas that you can share with the audience of interesting maybe opportunities in manufacturing for 2023. Do you have any thoughts of, some areas, if someone, let's say, wants to innovate on the hardware or software side, what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so something I talked about recently, and I posted an article on that caused quite a bit of, I knew it was going to cause a stir, but it caused quite a bit of stir on LinkedIn. Was is it time to move past ladder logic? Right? I know enough ladder logic to be dangerous. I am not an expert like you are, Vlad. It's been around for forever. It's a strong, stable platform in a language, but it's what we're seeing now is more very successful implementations of what I'm going to call low code. I hate the term no code because everything has code in it. But for example, UR was one of the pioneers that came out with a very simple, easy to program robot. It was great. It was text based, but it was kind of graphical in nature, drag and drop, indented. It really did they did a great job at creating a platform that made it really easy for non-technical people even to program robots. And since then there have been other people. Fanuc has got one, and pretty much all the robot guys have come out one. Ebson's got one as well. I think it's time to maybe start taking that thought process and applying it to the entire machine control. There are high-end systems that you're not going to replace ladder logic. It's too pervasive. It's too powerful. But if you look at the 80-20 rule, 80% of the automation processes out there are nothing more than I don't know, 25, 30 IO points, with some air cylinders or maybe a conveyor and a servo motor and a robot pick and placing into a ultrasonic welder or dispensing, or it's pretty simple, processes. And those are the processes that a lot of manufacturers think they can do themselves. They don't need an integrator for, because this is simple. And they usually do fairly well on the mechanical side, and even on the electrical design side, they do okay. And then they fall apart when it comes to programming, because they don't know PLCs, and they have to go hire a controls engineer or an integration group to come in and do it. And those guys are rightfully so expensive. If you had a tool that even the mechanical guy who designed, mechanical person who designed this, cell, to be able to go in and say, okay, if this sensor's on, then do this, and then while this is happening, if you had a language that worked that way, I think it would really open up the adoption of automation more. There's a lot of headwinds against it. There's a lot of people who will say it's ladder logic or die. We're not changing from it. But I think if the robot industry can do it, then why can't the machine control industry do it? I really don't see that there's a reason why you can't. And again, like I said, it's not going to replace everything, but I do think it's got a place.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. And again, we've seen a similar example. You've mentioned Cognex a little bit earlier, right? They had the spreadsheet designer, and now it's become like Easy Builder. So I think it also, at the end of the day, right, I like the way, I'm less familiar with UR, but I'm more familiar with the Cognex model, right, where you can start in Easy Builder and you can always look underneath and go and apply that logic in spreadsheets. And I think people may, push back on like replacing or changing up ladder logic, because they assume that your intent is to completely rip that out and put something that they're not used to in, right? But in reality, I think the transition is going to be slow and steady, I want to say, where you want to open up or give the opportunity to people to use either one. And I would also argue, like on the application side, I think that we always fall into the, like, use the right tool for the job. I think that's an obvious statement, but I think in many cases, you can also use either tool and accomplish the same job, right? So let's say if I'm more comfortable doing it with one tool, you're more comfortable in another, then it shouldn't be like, well, no, Vlad, like, you can't do this. We're going to standardize only on this. Because I think at the end of the day, there's going to come a time where the people you're looking to hire are going to come in with a certain background, and they're just going to say, well, no, then if I'm going to have to invest, a massive amount of time in a learning curve, then I might as well just take a job somewhere else, as we discussed, like in the software industry,
Yeah.
because they know Python, they know C++, they know Java, and so they're just gonna
Yep.
say like, no, well, we're not gonna deal with this. But that's again
Yeah.
my opinion. So
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, one of the large pushbacks that we get when you talk about going away from a ladder logic is like, oh, but the techs on the floor know ladder logic and they've got to be able to understand it. And I said, well, no, nobody's born knowing ladder logic, just like they're not born knowing Python. They are taught. So then the backup argument is, well, yeah, but it's just like electrical diagrams, so it's the relay logic type stuff. And they're like, well, but I took that in college and I still didn't understand PLC. I still had to learn PLC code. Just like I was taught, back, I took Fortran. And the funny thing is, I wanted to take C, and they're like, no, C's for electrical engineers, Fortran's for mechanical. And I was like, this is silly. The next semester, they got rid of Fortran and everybody took C. So, they're perfectly good languages. And you can teach anybody any of those languages. Now, taking a step back from that, making it more quote unquote low code, and easier to use. I took an example, of ladder logic, and I wrote some pseudo graphical code, kind of flowchart, and I showed it to my 14-year-old daughter, who is not technical, and I said, okay, she's done some Lego programming and stuff like that, but I said, all right, this ladder logic, what does this do? She's like, I have no idea what that is, and I said, okay, what does this code over here do? And she's like, well, it looks like if this turns on, then that happens, and it waits for this long, whatever. I'm like, okay, she with zero training could figure out, what this program did versus this other kind of cryptic language with these symbols that you need to know what they do. And so, yeah, I think like any innovation and any disruption, it's a disruption. People don't want to change; they're comfortable with what they are currently doing. But I think it's time that there is a disruption in the machine control industry.
And an interesting kind of side thought to even like this conversation, and I know this is possible in other languages. You know what I mean? Like there could be a tool that allows you to open the same logic in both editors, right? Like so, if you're comfortable with ladder logic, open it in ladder logic and edit it your way. And obviously, I
Mm-hmm.
understand that there's nuances to that, and maybe the very complex logic is going to be
Sure.
difficult to kind of massage in both ways. But at the end of the day, they're both translated into C and then into binary, to my
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. So there must be a balance where you can open it in both visual editors, because at the end of the day, even ladder logic is just a visual layer on top of what your microprocessor
Sure.
or microcontroller does. So,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
but Dave, what are your thoughts around this?
I think that we have heard kind of a number of good reasons throughout the last, I don't know, 90-ish shows as to why probably ladder logic will outlast all of us on this conversation. Probably our lifetimes, but certainly our time within the industry. So it will be around for longer than all of we will. But I think it's important for us to look at how can we make the programming in our industry more accessible, because we have a huge need of trained engineers and people that can code to come into our industry. And by saying, hey, you have to understand ladder logic, it makes it amazingly difficult. There's a huge barrier of entry, a huge step that someone must take and go to commit to at least understand, if not know fairly well, a programming language that will only be useful in this industry, and then they potentially leave this industry, and it is completely worth it, completely worthless for the rest of everything. But I think all of those are good points. I would like to go back to kind of the low code conversation and comment that you were bringing up, Sean. I guess I have seen a number of low code options. And when I look at low code options, I always think to myself, hey, these are interesting options, especially if I've got, engineers, or I've got maintenance techs, or I've got someone who generally knows what they need in order to be able to kind of go output an end product well. and to do it quicker. But I guess I kind of perceptively see a lot of low end, quote unquote, no code solutions kind of going and saying, hey, manufacturers, you guys can go kind of build this up all internally with your already overworked engineers who don't really have time to do it, but they can go find time to do this. Where do you
Sure.
see specifically low code? Where do you see low code kind of within the industry, and where do you think it fits best?
So, yeah, you're absolutely right, and I've always made that same argument. Is like, oh, manufacturers, they go, we're going to automate internally, and I said, okay, so you're a manufacturing engineer, and you are paid to, make sure the manufacturing lines run well, right? Yeah, okay. So when do you have time to build an automation machine? So you're working two jobs basically, and you're going to do neither one of them great because they both are going to suffer. Let the experts take care of it. So, I think it would be the OEMs and the integrators, the machine builders would probably need to adopt this for simple cells, small little work cells, CNC loading type cell, simple, somewhat standardized products to get them in the hands of the manufacturers, who then can go in, and if they do need to change the code or for whatever reason, or make a modification because their part changed or some environment changed, they could very easily do that. Then it becomes a little bit more acceptable. Like, ooh, we like that low code solution that you provide to us. Provide it again for the next cell, right?
Yep.
I think it'll start spreading that way. So it's got to be kind of a grassroots. There will be innovative companies that they do have. We've worked with several companies that have the in-house automation groups. That's they're not manufacturing engineers. They're automation guys who build equipment internally. And there's some great people out there doing that. Those are the companies I think that will adopt it. It'll be enterprise level. It'll be a mixture. Let me back this up. It'll be a mixture of, I'm going to call it the mom and pop manufacturers who have just a couple sporadic pieces of automation, and enterprise level where they're like, okay, yes, I know our standard has always been, Allen Bradley or Siemens or whatever it is, but for cells under a certain size or under a certain IO count or whatever it is, we're going to go with this, XYZ low code platform, because then you can do standardization across multiple plants, across the entire organization. You can build in some standards of how do you code these low code, applications. So it'll be a mixture, like any other, technology. I think it'll be a mixture of coming from the OEM side and the manufacturing side, and then there'll be this, merger, and it'll kind of figure itself out. The biggest thing is going to be getting people to go back and change their standards that were written, in 1983 that, that have not been changed. I mean, we've seen specs that literally spec out PLCs that have been obsolete for 10 years, and I'm like, you guys haven't changed this in a while, have you? So.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. I guess in my opinion, that's where I see the biggest opportunity lying as well. I have seen a couple of, especially enterprise organizations, try to kind of go it their own under the guise of we're going to go save money. And it always took 4 or 5 times as long. And they always had to pull resources off in order to, and so they're not doing their job. And when I look at the outcome of it, they're very excited, right? So it's this application. They only spent like 6 months figuring it out. They only spent like, I don't know, $600,000 on it. And at the end of the day, they think they're going to save $500,000 a year across 4 facilities. And I look at it and I'm like, this is really bad, guys, right? Like I understand that everyone tried really hard, but you're losing probably about $4 million of opportunity because you couldn't find it within your budget to go pay people whose jobs it is every day to go find the efficiencies within some of these facilities. So it will absolutely be interesting to see where we go as we continue down this path. But no, this has been an amazing conversation. Typically, this is where I ask you to predict the future, Sean, but I feel like we've been demanding you predict the future for the last, 30 to 65 minutes. Are there any other future predictions that you would like to throw in here now that we haven't already asked you about?
Oh gosh, when it comes to well, let's see here. The Gators are not going to win the national championship next year. I can pretty much guarantee you that. Georgia's got a good contention to win it again, I think. In our industry though,
Yep.
just overall, there's going to be I'm repeating a little bit what I've said, but the overall theme I think is there's going to be a little bit more headwinds this year. Things are not going to be quite as simple and gangbusters as they were the last couple of years. There will be exceptions. There's companies out there that I'm sure are going to have record year in 23, but overall as an industry, I think we just need to be cognizant of what's going to of what's going to be happening in the political, economic, geopolitical, world right now. Don't overspend. Watch your budgets. Be around for 2024. So, and who knows? Things turn around at the end of 23, which they probably will, if I had to guess. 24 could be a banner year again, right? Yep. So, this is just one that we gotta get through this one. Thank goodness we don't have COVID to deal with this year, so it won't be as bad as 2020 and 2021.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. I like to joke. I guess this originally started as almost a half joke of a book recommendation, where I call it the hashtag not sponsored Audible recommendation, where I ask people for audiobook recommendations and Vlad goes and immediately downloads them. I will say Vlad has downloaded something like 160 book recommendations, and we have far outpaced his ability and his time to listen to them, at least as per the last time he was going on vacation. And he had many book recommendations to listen to, but do you have a book recommendation or two perhaps for us, Sean?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I posted. I actually asked the same question recently on LinkedIn because I kind of got to a point. I finished a couple of books and I was like, "Hey, what is everybody reading?" And I said, "Don't give me your business books. I've read so many of those. I want something else." And I took a couple of the recommendations and I've got them now. And one of them is called Stiff. It's by Mary Roach. The subtitle is I think it's called the Hidden World of the Human Cadaver. And it's basically about what happens to bodies once you die. It's fascinating. It's very humorous as well too. It talks about donating your body to science and crash test dummies and things like that. It's a really, you got to have a unique sense of humor, but it's a really good book. The other one I'm reading too, I usually have two or three going at a time. It's called The Drunkard's Walk. It's how randomness how affects our lives and how it's built in, how randomness is built into our lives. So it kind of satisfies my mathematical nerdy side by talking about some math behind randomness. But then it also talks about how it just affects your relationship with your loved ones and work and just how things happen in the world. So those are two ones that I'm reading right now that are pretty interesting.
Interesting and unique. Absolutely, the two words that come to top of mind as you're describing those. I appreciate it. We always appreciate non-business specific related books, because I don't know, Vlad needs something to listen to on in that 12 minutes outside of when he stops working and before he goes to bed at night. So thank you very much for that, Sean. So we love career advice, right? And you have had kind of a little bit twisting career where you've done a whole bunch of things and you are getting ready to figure out what the next phase of the career looks like. So with that said, what is maybe some of the best career advice you have for maybe mid-career people, maybe people looking to go start a business or take over part of a business?
Be fearless. It's a tough thing to do. And trust. There's times that I've sat there and go, like, I'm not sure I can do this. So you've got to take a chance. You've got to. If you don't take that chance, you never know what'll happen. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Right? There's a lot of cliches, but don't be afraid to analyze the situation and then just say, I don't have all the data. Because we as technical people and engineers, a lot of times we want all the variables filled out before we do anything. And I've learned over the years, especially in business, you can't do that because it's not just all about the math and the science. It's about people. How you don't know what this customer's feeling. You don't know what their emotional state is. And again, us engineers don't deal well with emotional states anyway. So how do we you got to take a guess sometimes. You got to be bold. There's been times before where I've like, you know what, I'm putting my foot down with this customer on this, and it may shoot us in the foot. And then it's turned out that they respected the fact that we held our line, and like they agreed to what we were asking. So don't be afraid to fail either. I have always taught all of my engineers, sometimes we bring in people from other companies, and they were always in a culture of, if you ask for help, that's seen as a sign of weakness. We were the exact opposite. We were, if you struggle on a problem for too long and spinning your wheels and you're not asking for help, that's a problem, right? Because the guy right next to you may have the answer, and he could just help you out, and boom, now you're off to the races. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to fail. We're not all going to be perfect, because otherwise you get the analysis paralysis, and you never make a decision. And I always say, not making a decision is making a decision. But you're not going to grow, right? So be bold, try new things. You're going to screw up. It's okay. Just try not to screw up on the same thing, more than once.
Sean,
Absolutely.
if I can do a follow-up, Dave. Sorry to
please.
maybe get us into a second question on that. I think like Sean is very well positioned to answer this question that I have, that I'm very curious about. So Sean, how do you evaluate, maybe when you have a lot of opportunities that come your way, how do you evaluate which ones to pursue, right? And again, maybe I'll piggyback off my own personal experience, but there's a lot of things you could be doing with your time. How do you select the right ones, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that just comes with experience and learning from your mistakes. Early on in R&D's career, we took on pretty much any job that would come towards us. We did things that we had no business doing. People were like, "Hey, have you ever done this before?" Like, "No, but we'll figure it out," right? And we barely made any money, on this project, and then we were like, "Okay, so we're not doing that again," right? So over time, then now you're presented with these things. When you have the luxury of being a little bit larger company too, you can then start to pick and choose what you're good at, right? And you can just say, "Look, I'm sorry, we don't do food and beverage, for example, but I can put you in touch with a company that will, because your next project may not be food and beverage. It may be something that we could help you with," right? So you don't fall in that trap of saying yes to everything, because you can get yourself in trouble, right? And I've seen some companies, quite frankly, just go bankrupt because they took on projects that, when you look at them, you're like, why did they take on that project? It doesn't fit their wheelhouse. It just doesn't, they don't have the expertise in it. You've got to be bold, but at the same time, you do have to know your limitations, right? So I wish there was a magic bullet for figuring out, what those best projects are, but unfortunately, I think you got to take your lumps sometimes on to learn which ones you are good at, which ones you aren't good at.
Appreciate that.
No, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. All really great advice. For Vlad, for myself, and for probably more than a few people who needed to hear that at the moment. So thank you for that, Sean. And then the last question we like to ask is, how can our listeners help you? I know that you're in kind of a bit of a transition phase. Typically, this is where I would ask, are you guys looking for customers? Are you looking to hire? What does that look like? So I'm going to open this up, maybe make it a little bit broader. Sean, who do you want to connect with? How can our listeners help you?
I enjoy talking about this industry, and it's passion of mine. It's all I've ever known. People ask me like, "Oh, you're going to go do something else?" I'm like, I don't know if I know how to do anything else. I've really done this my entire life. So I enjoy, giving advice to people who are up and coming, and even in large companies. I would just say that if you are a company, or of a company that might want just maybe you can do it well. You just want a second opinion, a fresh set of eyes, just a different take on how you've done things. I brought in a business advisor at one point, a pair of business advisors, just because I wanted somebody to challenge me. I've always done things this way. I want somebody to come in and say, "Hey, why are you doing it this way? Maybe you should be doing it in a different type of manner." Whether it be a manufacturer, whether it be a robot manufacturer, or a air cylinder or a venture capital or a private equity firm or whatever it happens to be, as long as it's in that automation industrial space. If you want a second opinion, you want some advice, you want unsolicited opinions, reach out to me and let's talk and let's see. Everybody who knows me knows I'm not short of opinions. That's for sure.
I love it. Thank you, Sean. This has been amazing, and thank you everyone for coming to hang out with all of us. We will absolutely have to have Sean back on at some point in the future after he has figured out which direction he is going and can share a little bit more of that. I will say, if you guys have made it all the way to the end, please go ahead and hit that like button. Please go ahead, if you're listening in podcast form, to rate us 5 stars on all those places you can rate us 5 stars, and hit the follow. It helps. We will be in your podcast earbuds every Thursday at some point. If you guys are watching us live, again, thank you very much. Feel free to subscribe to Solus PLC. Hit the like button on the LinkedIn Live. Follow us on Manufacturing Hub. And if you guys want to be notified of all of the upcoming shows and everything we've got going on, please check out manufacturinghub.live, which is the home to all of this. Until next Wednesday, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.